As many people noticed last week, Mikaido's suit was very reminiscent to that of a bomb suit. So him surviving the initial blast, I think was probably on a lot of people's minds. But even with that kind of like shocking cliffhanger, but kind of assuming he probably will at the very least make it into next week's episode, it was still a surprisingly unexpected episode because when you think of what fights in this show could look like, I don't think it's as complex as many series with power systems because they have arrows and wings. They can flee, they can fly around, and they can shoot things, right? But the idea of kind of like taking a knife to a gunfight with backed by kind of arrows, and then you add in human weaponry from bombs to handguns to this or that. I mean, a combat knife was enough to destroy women and children alike with that crazy girl A. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can really spice it up, and I actually like how they incorporated the 3D, because if you go frame by frame in this episode, you can like look at the character models when they're in their 3D forms and they're moving around. You're not going to be making that your wallpaper, but in motion, it really gives you a sense of like, that was a crazy ass fight where, because Mirai is a person who doesn't want to kill, doesn't even want to be a part of this, really, he just wants to be happy. And because of that, he's so locked in not wanting to shoot, but he wants to just stab, and he has no logic behind it. He has no reasoning. He kind of just lost it in this episode. And in doing so, we actually learn a pretty interesting idea that even the most intelligent of angels, may be the most intelligent angel that is known in this series, was surprised by what Mirai was able to do in ways that even she didn't know. I think it's interesting that kind of like a blast with a blast can kind of negate it sort of a thing. And it definitely allows for, it could easily, I think an author could write a show like this and have it like, oh, a white arrow kills, a red arrow controls. And if you shoot, it's almost guaranteed. But if you have wings, you can escape. But, it's kind of like a homing missile, right? It'll lock on and there's no real way to deflect. So it's kind of like cat versus mouse. Whoever sees the first one first is going to be able to kill. But being able to kind of like stomp and destroy the shards with kind of like negating it, I think is a pretty cool concept to kind of add an almost shielding mechanic to something that you necessarily won't think about at first, but seeing it in motion kind of gives you that type of feel. Mirai is a character who gets a lot of shit in this show, and I think a lot of people are looking at him as kind of being like, oh, he's a weak character, he's not being a hero, he's not, thinking about the good of people, but, that's kind of human nature in general. Most people don't want to be heroes. Most people just want to live a normal life. And, I mean, if you really consider this situation, I mean, it's something most people would be in a pretty similar boat. And I think that's what makes it a pretty interesting take on a kind of like death battle formula, where Mirai in this episode even says, the last person surviving, the last person standing is not even guaranteed to be God. What you're doing is just being a murderer for the easiest way out. And, someone like Metropolitan is saying, yeah, but I'm trying to limit the casualties. And there's the argument to be made. If he does become God, could he revive people? Maybe that's the logic. But I mean, a normal person who was suicidal, who literally was someone who, when he was beaten from family to bullies, like, he just didn't stand up for himself. And you can call that weak, but I call that someone who suffered abuse and really doesn't want to take that same type of pain out. And I imagine over probably the next, third of this anime, right? I would say probably by episode 14 or 15, I would imagine his character will change from not wanting to shoot arrows or things like that, but he very much seems like he's going to stay true to his character of just wanting to be a decent person and living by the morals of his family. Where you have someone like, obviously, Best Boy Mikaido, who is a family man, right? He understands it's a different perspective. Someone who's dying and wants to save the future for his family versus someone who lost everything and just wants kindness to be there. And you can argue it's childish, it's, mundane, like there's no reason for it, but I think just wanting to be a good person is something that shouldn't be like shied away as being a boring character. I think in the face of this type of genre, where I know some people don't like me calling it a battle royale because it doesn't have to technically be one. We're in a battle royale, whether it was supposed to be or not, or whether it had to be or not, I should say. And to see a character like him who literally, like, he's not really trying to win. Like, for him, he would just like to sit in that apartment the entire way through. And it's a conflicting thing where killing someone like Metropolitan, there's a million arguments as why you're a good person for killing him, because you would save so many people. And would you really want someone like him to harness the power of God? But really, there's an equal amount of arguments on why it's unfair to force Mirai to do something he doesn't want. And it's interesting because I completely understand why so many people don't like him as a person per se, or like following him necessarily. But he's surrounded by such varying personalities and beliefs that I think it makes it, whether you like it or relate to his kind of like mindset of just not wanting to kill, which I do think if you took the vast majority of people put in this situation, not looking at it as a show to watch or to relate to, things like that, that's how most people would probably act, especially if they were just prone to suicidal thoughts moments before the show started up, right? But it's interesting because you have a really great balance with him and Mikado, because Mikado is a very mature, and I think a lot of people would argue, oh, I'd much rather just having him as the protagonist. But as it stands, I mean, Mikado, Mirai, and everyone, like the angels and everything like that, they're all kind of the main character, right? There's multiple main characters with how they're directing it. I mean, Metropolitan's almost a main character in his own way with how long he's been around. So it's nice to have something where you have varying personalities in a show that could easily get dry or boring. Because, yeah, I would be right up there. If it was just Mirai interacting with just himself and his internal kind of like sob thoughts, like, yeah, that would be annoying. But backed by having like everyone having a different opinion of what to do. I mean, just look at the fact that Mirai is completely happy being with his crush, and his crush might be even more depressed than he is as a person, and she feels probably unworthy of even like having his love, so to speak, right? Everyone has their own trauma and how they're dealing with it, and that's kind of what makes it so interesting to me. It'll be fun to see though, because I really thought, even though I was thinking about it over the past couple of days, Mikado surviving was something on my mind, but I thought he would die in this episode, or Metropolitan, maybe even both. The reason being is I'm liking Metropolitan as a character, but I could easily see him not lasting the entire series. If he does, excellent. I think he's a great contrast, and I think a pretty realistic contrast to many people given that type of power. But Mikaido's a character who he does have a lesser of a clock, right, of how long he can live. So to have him actually come out of this alive along with Metropolitan, forcing Metropolitan to flee, and yeah, you can argue Mirai could have killed him, and even Mikado probably could have killed him as well. But to see like what they're able to accomplish to force him to flee, I mean, that situation was completely unexpected, and I think was great character turning points for all three of them. I mean, at the very least, they now know of his face, which should be a pretty good, like, upper hand, because he doesn't know their faces, and also he thinks that Mikado is the one with the S-rank angel, which was a pretty smart play on their part. But I will say, like, just the overall fight and how they directed it, I thought was so cool, because really, if you were trying to hype someone up, like if you knew of the manga, and the manga was a pretty lengthy fight with some great art design with how they were attacking, I don't know how you would necessarily hype someone up for this type of fight, because it's not something that you could explain. Mirai gets a power up and summons a fireball, and then that destroys the city, right? We have wings and arrows. There's not much you can really explain, but I think the studio brought their A game in comparison to probably what the manga did. The manga probably had these like very big pictures with really crisp art. The anime studio, what they can do is they can have these fast movements with great 3D camera work and some pretty badass voice acting, all things considered. I mean, I love Platinum, and I definitely think it gets some unwarranted criticism, especially for Mirai's character. I think a lot of times when you have shows like these, you know, people like are saying, oh, I wouldn't be that weak-willed, or I'd do something different, but this is all just human nature in varying different ways, in a pretty shitty situation that I think even the most suicidal of characters, you know, I think the person who wants to be God, it says a lot about them as a person, and the people who don't are probably wishing they just continued to jump off that building, right? But then at the same time, you have a second chance at life, and it's a pretty complex situation. But yeah, I mean, Platinum End continues to be something I'm enjoying anyway. We'll see how the remaining episodes go from here, but let me know your thoughts and feelings down below. Leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe if you're new around here. So until next time, everyone, please take care and have a good one.